Welcome back to your new episode. My guest speaker for today is an aspiring professional who's combining two essential fields, pharmacy and law. Mariana, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Everyone. My name is Marianna Pozdicra. I am a practicing pharmacist and a just finished second year of law school. It's really great to be on this show with you, Mara.
Oh, awesome. Glad to have you as well. So let's start from the very beginning. So, what interested you in the profession of pharmacy?
Mhm. So when I was growing up, actually when I was fairly young, my mom and both my parents actually really encouraged us to think about what careers we want to go into, what kind of post-secondary education we want to do. They really placed a big emphasis on education. I'm really grateful for that. But being immigrant parents, they sort of gave us two options. They asked me when I was 8 years old if I want to be a doctor or a lawyer. So pharmacy wasn't an option initially. This was kind of a pick your own adventure. And during my teenage years, my sister was actually doing pharmacy school. So she's 10 years older than me, and I was the annoying younger sibling that would bug her as she was trying to study. I don't know how she tolerated me, but I would ask her questions, and she would try to explain like clinical and pharmacokinetics and pharmacy law, even. And I found that I was really interested in these topics. So pharmacy became something that I started to think more and more about. And so when it actually came time to decide what program I wanted to go into in university, pharmacy was a very easy choice for me because I had seen someone really close to me do it. And I had that interest that had been developing over several years already.
Oh, awesome. So during the pharmacy program, what are some of the experiences which you had, which like kind of motivated you to eventually like study law after you graduate from pharmacy?
Yeah. So one of the opportunities that I had very early on in pharmacy, it was actually my first pharmacy summer job, was working with the College of Pharmacists of Manitoba. So that's our regulatory body, sort of like OCP in Ontario. And I really got an appreciation for the importance of regulation, and particularly how a particular like law is written, the language that's used, and how that actually impacts pharmacy practice and how that impacts access to healthcare. So I really, like, through that summer, had some great mentors and a great team at the college, and that prompted me to think about law as a career. And I was coming back to that seed that was planted when I was 8 years old about law. And I think that was just sort of the final push, that might be, I might want to combine both of these two kind of expert areas, and where I can bridge the gaps between the two.
Oh, awesome. So I remember from your experience that you mentioned you worked with the Manitoba government's pharmaceutical policy unit. So I was wondering, like, what did your work entail, and if you can share any insights from your work over there.
Yeah, that was a little bit later in my while I was in pharmacy school. I really wanted to work. The Manitoba government has a particular unit in Manitoba Health called the Pharmaceutical Policy Unit, and the work that I did initially, it was very much focused on essentially approvals for exception medications for Manitobans, but then I would ask more and more to be given really like policy projects. And in fact, now several years ago, it's been really cool to see it come to fruition. I feel like I was their student who they asked, oh, can you look into what other provinces have done on biosimilar switching policies? And it was like 2020, and I would be looking into that. And now, just last year in 2024, Manitoba's finally started its biosimilar switching policy. Similar thing when new NAPRA compounding guidelines came out. They were like, can you explain these to us? Because not everybody in that unit is a pharmacist. There are pharmacists who work there, but there's also non-pharmacist policy analysts. So it was very neat to have that role of a little bit like a translator between the pharmacy field and then that policy lens too.
Oh, interesting. So, reflecting on your background in pharmacy, what would you say are some of the essential skills which you are carrying forward into like your law studies?
Mm-hmm. I think that, pharmacists get really good at problem solving. And I've heard it said very often about lawyers that lawyers are kind of professional problem solvers, and that's very much true. But I would extend that same thing to pharmacists because I think our entire education was really focused around drug therapy problems, right? And coming up with a possible solution or a possible several solutions to present to somebody, usually a prescriber or the entire medical team, to say, this is what we might be at risk of, or this is what this patient might be experiencing, and this is what needs to happen. And so I actually find that to be fairly similar to what we do in law is you will identify a problem or identify a risk or a liability and then speak to your client and say, here's a couple of options of what we can do. Here's the option I recommend. And then work with them to achieve that pathway that they decide to go down and to advocate for them and find a resolution. So I think that was a huge help and really expanded like your analytical reasoning and your logical reasoning and just the ability to comprehend a complex problem because nothing in pharmacy or law is really simple. If it was simple, then they probably wouldn't be coming to us with questions about it. So it that really traverses both of the fields.
Oh, that's amazing that you were able to like utilize the skills that you had as a pharmacist into your another career as a law practitioner. So I was wondering if there's a specific area you're interested in law, which will allow you to merge between your skills as a pharmacist and your future career as a law practitioner as well.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I was really passionate about looking for as I proceed in my legal studies and eventually in being called to the bar. And I was really fortunate to have a great experience last summer at a firm out in Calgary called Borden Ladner Gervais or BLG. They're a national firm, so they have offices in Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and BC. And one of their biggest clients is Hiroc, which is sort of like I guess the best word to use would be insurance for hospitals. So anytime there's an issue related to hospitals, BLG will tend to be on file. And that really gave me an opportunity to merge the two because some of the things that I was doing throughout the summer involved, doing research that related to things in healthcare or reading through documentation in patient charts. And I felt very familiar and at home in that space because I've read through many patient charts before. So it was very neat to find that kind of work. And it's work that is both, reactive if there's a particular case related to something, but it is also work that is proactive. So, as lawyers, we're also um, strategically advise our clients on certain things. So I think having that insight to know, okay, if you have a client who is either a healthcare professional or who works in a particular setting or operates in a particular industry, having that familiarity with the industry, which is what I feel I have within healthcare and pharmacy, has been really helpful. Not to say it's essential to the work, like that you couldn't do it without. There's so many really excellent lawyers who will learn and almost know so much about their particular clients' needs that it's almost like they finished med school or pharmacy school or engineering or those other programs. But I think that it also is very helpful to come from the background of saying, I've been there, I've been in this field. these are, again, the kinds of risks that you might be able to identify, having been in those shoes before.
Oh, awesome. So following up on that, like given your perspective as a pharmacist and your current exposure to law, I was wondering if there are any legal principles that you think pharmacists should be more aware of in their day-to-day practice.
So I'll give like a big disclaimer that I have to give, which is I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice, because that's the that's the thing that legally have to say. But I think one of the things that has really been impressed upon me, when I've come back to, because I moved to Alberta and I practiced law, or I didn't practice law. I worked within a law firm there and I practiced pharmacy in Alberta. And then after that summer, I've come back to Manitoba to finish my studies and gone back into pharmacy practice here. And what I really learned from last summer was the importance of documentation. Like you have it drilled into you that, you need to document, document, document. And I've seen really firsthand where really thorough documentation has made the job of lawyers much easier. And it also is something that I integrate into my own practice now, because I think there's a lot that happens in a pharmacy that we might not necessarily document. I think about OTC counsels or random drug questions that you're answering, and then there might be little to no record that you ever gave that answer. We're very accessible, and so part of that is that we get a lot of questions. So it can be hard to also integrate that documentation into our workflow. I think we have great documentation when it comes to the dispensing steps, but we really need to make sure that we're doing the same thing when it comes to the clinical work that we do. And I think there's really great examples of this, and a lot of pharmacists are doing a really, really good job of it. But it has really been impressed upon me even further when I saw, okay, when something actually does go wrong, this is the value that good documentation offers.
Yeah, and I do agree documentation is very crucial, especially in basically documenting all your interactions with the patients and all your recommendations, even your conversations with the physicians as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, expanding more on that question from a public health perspective, how do you think pharmaceutical law shapes healthcare policy?
Mhm. So I think when we say law, we can mean a number of different things. And what I'll choose to talk about maybe is legislation or regulation. And so I'm shifting a little bit more into my pharmacy advocacy hat here, but I think you see in particular, within uh, some provinces, but I can speak to Manitoba perhaps most familiarly, that specifically the way that the legislation is written or a regulation is written is going to impact how many patients or how patients access a particular service. So we had sort of an example of this last summer in Manitoba, when the new Prevnar 20 vaccine came out. So if any of your listeners are in pharmacy, they'll be very familiar with that vaccine. But for those who aren't, that's essentially the newest pneumonia vaccine. And in the past, it covered 13 different kind of variants of the bug that causes pneumonia, and now it covers 20, which is great. We want patients to have more protection. And the way that the law in Manitoba was written, pharmacists were only allowed to inject the Prevnar 13, so the old vaccine. And whenever we'd get somebody coming in asking for a new one, it would become this thing of, okay, now it's not going to be publicly funded because the way that it's written in our law is, written Prevnar 13. So the difference that it makes when you have something written in a very specific way versus a more generally pneumococcal or pneumonia vaccine, you can start to see how the words that we use in our laws impact patient access, and it impacts patient health, right? Like you might have a patient who would have really wanted to get that Prevnar 20 at their pharmacy on that particular day, or maybe they drove into the city from a rural or remote community to get that vaccine that day, and now they can't. Or now we're adding an extra step and we're adding to the burden in the healthcare system by asking them, okay, you have to go to a physician or you have to go to another provider who we already know are strained with the workload that they have. So I think, coming from both a law perspective and a pharmacy practice perspective, what I'm really inspired to do is at any opportunity we get, really make sure that our laws are future proof because science continuously evolves, pharmacy will continuously evolve, and it's probably evolving at a faster pace than the legislative and regulatory amendment process. So we really have to make sure that when we're, for instance, even expanding scope and adding new things to our regulations, that we're doing it in a way that ensures that what we write today is going to be relevant in 5 and 10 years, because that's the way we're going to have a public health impact if we're proactive with our regulations.
Exactly. And like moving on into another important topic in pharmacy, which is manufacturing drugs and drug availability. So we always hear like every once in a while this drug being discontinued and drug recalls. So look, I wanted to get your opinion or thoughts on this. How do you think like legislature or basically law, how does it play a role in ensuring drug safety and availability?
That's a very interesting question. And I had, when I was on my fourth year community pharmacy rotation, I did a presentation that related to drug shortages and why we maybe have so many drug shortages. And I know right now, with talk of the tariffs and the trade war that we're in, that's a very hot topic. I think that there's a number of things that legislators need to understand. The first, and again, this is wearing my Manitoba hat a little bit, pharmacists in Manitoba can't do therapeutic substitution. So, therapeutic substitution is when a particular medication in a particular class might be unavailable, or maybe it is something that the patient isn't tolerating. Maybe there's a drug shortage. Um, Pharmacists in other provinces, like when I practice in Alberta, for instance, we would be able to change that medication to a different medication within the same drug class, so within the same family of medications. And that's something that we can't do in Manitoba. So, whenever there is a shortage of a particular drug, even if other drugs in that same family are available and would be expected to have the same effect for the patient, we're having to fax the prescriber, adding to their workload, adding to their administrative burden, and delaying patient access to their medication while we're waiting for a response. So one of the things is empowering really folks who are on the front lines to resolve the problems that they are seeing. So that's one thing that I wish that legislators, particularly in Manitoba, understood. And I think we're one of the last provinces that hasn't seen that kind of amendment. And then the other is really just having a national strategy related to drug shortages, having a strategy where we're ensuring we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. We have multiple different sources for a particular drug so that if there is a shortage of one manufacturer, there are other ones that we can switch to. Having that kind of a strategy nationally. I know we have those strategies on like a hospital by hospital or hospital network level, but having that kind of strategy nationally is really important. And I think, would save a lot of time for pharmacists, but most importantly, it would improve access for patients.
I agree. That's indeed an important strategy to ensure there are no drug shortages, whether locally or nationally. Moving back to the main topic of basically driving innovation in the profession of pharmacy. So let's say if there's someone who's interested in like doing their MBA after they finish their pharmacy program, or basically combining it with any other profession. Given your current experience, what would be some pieces of advice that you would give that person or like newly graduated pharmacist?
Mhm. I would really say have confidence in the education that you have as a pharmacist. The educational programs across the country are top notch. And I think, when I was going into law school and starting out, I kind of, I guess pharmacy and law are very different. So I sort of fell into this trap of thinking, like, oh gosh, this is going to be very difficult because when was the last time I've written an essay? When was the last time I've had to like read 200 pages of pre-readings in a week? How am I going to do this? And I think we really have to recognize that the education you get in pharmacy, it prepares you to practice pharmacy, but it also expands your knowledge and your analytical skills in a way that gives you a really unique perspective, whatever you choose to do next, right? So whether that is an MBA and you're applying those analytical skills there, or whether it is a JD, a law degree, where maybe the skills that you learn in writing very concise chart notes is actually very transferable to writing a very concise research memo or a very concise client letter. So I think I would encourage folks to have really appreciate and have confidence in that they've gone through. I will often say law school is only hard if you haven't done pharmacy school first. Pharmacy school is by far much more difficult than my law degree. And I think that, again, that also builds your grit and that builds your capacity to learn and to grow. So have confidence.
Amazing. Moving on to the last question. Where do you envision yourself in the next 5 years?
Okay. I, I think this is a very fun question because I think back to like 5 years ago, and I don't know that I envisioned myself here. After I've finished my law degree, Lord willing, I'll be heading to Calgary to do my articles. So that's just essentially like a year that's similar to an internship year, and really working closely with the lawyers there and helping them on their files, and then again, if all goes well, be called to the bar in 2027. So that only brings us 2 years forward. Over the course of the next 3 years, I think I've learned to be really open to opportunities and doors that open and different pathways. And I think I am really excited in whatever I do to find things that are going to be in that overlap between healthcare and law, because I know it's an area that I thrive in, and I know it's also an area that, like, we need those systems talking to each other. I sometimes think of it as having various pillars in our society. The healthcare system is a really critical pillar in our society. The legal system is a very critical pillar in our society. And the legislative system is very critical. And if those pillars are not connected and they're not talking to each other, then that really leads to poor outcomes for Canadians wherever we are.
Definitely. It's very critical having the perspective of a pharmacist, or basically having like the background of pharmacy in mind when shaping healthcare policies.
Absolutely.
Well, best of luck on your future journey, and it's been a pleasure having you as like a speaker.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a big pleasure having this chat with you, Mara. Thank you.
Thank you.